So this is going to be a sort of impromptu how to light a cook stove video, just because there's really not a lot out there, and what I have seen has been pretty hit or miss, and I haven't really seen a lot of videos out there on these old, let's just say they're not airtight, these old cooktops. So that's what I'm going to do, and if anybody, a few of you might notice that my top's pretty dirty. Might do a video on how I clean that soon. You know, a lot of people have these nice, super shiny tops, and you know, we don't use stove black, so that's one strike against the color. You know, it's all uneven, and we don't care. You know, this is a workhorse. This isn't a showpiece. But you know, we oil it every day, and but we cook 3 meals a day every day on it, so eventually it gets really scuzzy, and there's a pretty straightforward method I use to clean it, and so I'll probably pop a video up about that at some point. The stove needs to be hot, well, not hot, but warmer than this. This is off, so the stove has to be warm to clean it the best. Otherwise you're just scrubbing and scrubbing and scrubbing. It's a waste of time. So anyways, lighting a stove. I have some leftover wood in there from yesterday when I decided to let this burn down, so that I could do some maintenance. I like to give it a vacuum, clean out the ash box, you know, clean the face of it and whatnot every couple weeks. So I pick a day when it's warm out, which these days up here in New England seems to be all too frequent in the winter. And pick a day when it's going to be warm out, let it burn out, and then I do it. So you might be able to hear our smoke alarms in the background beeping because it gets real cold in here without the stove. And then the low batteries chirp, and that all goes away once the stoves get up to heat. So really necessary that you control your airflow with your damper and not with your ash door or your other air inlets, because you know, the hotter you run these, you know, the less time you'll be able to enjoy them. The tops will warp real bad, and to a degree it's hard to keep these, you know, perfect. Like with an airtight, you can get the cooktop really dialed in, and so you know, occasionally you'll probably overfire your stove if you have one of these and a really good chimney like I do. You know, but you shouldn't be overfiring your stove more than once or twice a year if you want to have it for any length of time. And when I say overfiring, I just mean uncomfortably hot temperatures. I don't mean cherry red, glowing. If your stove is glowing red, you need to stop adding wood and close up your air and cool it off ASAP, because that is very dangerous, very bad for your stove, and potentially very bad for you, especially if that happens in an overnight and your house burns down. So anyways, I am going to put a handful of paper in there on the left, right next to that leftover piece of wood. And I'm just using some old dunnage that came with a shipment, you know, like an Amazon net paper. And then I'm going to put some small wood, some kindling, and some medium-sized stuff on there. And then I'm going to light it. Alright, so I've got my little twigs and some medium-sized stuff in there. And you'll notice that a lot of the stuff I burned is deadfall. And we back up to a fairly large amount of woods, so that's a luxury that we have. And you know, if you're using regular, you know, processed firewood, I mean, you're probably already familiar with how to do a regular standard wood stove. But if you it's pretty easy to figure out how to get one of these operational. But basically the key is smaller wood. Even if you have a larger firebox than this, if you're cooking on it, not just heating, when you're cooking and you want a short, fast heat, Even if you're going to be running it hot, you know, for heating afterwards, you want your cooking wood to be smaller. So these bits are pretty ideal for, you know, a nice hot fire. This is sassafras, so this burns quick. This isn't good for heating at all, really. It's almost like pine and how quickly it burns. And then we've got some other stuff out, some hardwoods. You want to make sure that your top damper is wide open. And if you, your oven might have a different location, but make sure your oven control, make sure it's set to open. Make sure this is shut. The ash door is how I'm going to be lighting it, so that's going to be wide open for now. And I've got the lid open just because I want to be able to see it. Now I just basically use a regular lighter. Try to find, it's kind of hard to do blindly. Yep, it lit. So just close it up. And if you did it right, it should just start rip-roaring really quickly. Of course, I probably didn't do it right because I'm making a video. But you know, this chimney drafts pretty well. This is ice cold. The chimney's ice cold. It hasn't been run in about 12 hours. It's a steel chimney, so it is cold. This just happens to draft very well. As you can see, I've got the lid open. We're not losing anything. Where it's going, it's leaking out from the other plate gaps, and it's going right back up the chimney. So, anyhow, now that that's lit, I'm just going to put some larger bits in there. And it's a little bit wet because we've had storms the past few days, but it's not wet on the inside. It's just the bark layer. So, of course, the phone ran out of storage space. And yes, I'm using my phone today. My other camera is out of commission. But it hasn't gotten too hot. Ooh, that's getting hot there. Yeah, you can see. Not too hot yet. So it's still just getting going. But I just chucked a couple slightly larger pieces in there. But, so this won't be as hot as fast as normal since I've got that big chunk of wood sitting in there. So I've got the damper still on, wide open. Stove, oven's still set to open, so it's going straight up the chimney. You can probably see it. I don't think I can get a good angle without melting my phone, but anyways, it's going straight up that corner. As you can see, the sparks kind of trail off. Good. Right up. There's the stovepipe. If you've got it on bake, then what it does is it wraps around the oven box a couple. Then it goes up the chimney afterwards. So it's actually, these old stoves keep a lot of the heat in the house. That's pretty much within 5-10 degrees of what the infrared usually reads, so so we keep it there. Why not? It's always good to be able to glance at it, and even if your thermometer is not all that accurate, as you use your stove, you'll begin to get like a reference point based on whatever numbers it is reading. So, pardon those birds in the background. Getting some sunlight and get some feisty. So, anyways, to operate this, basically, you're just the more wide open this is, the more air is getting drawn directly up through your wood, the hotter this is going to run, especially if you've got this, your damper, wide open. So you want to control your overall heat with your damper and your fire overall too. You know, I try not to run the stove wide open unless it's just getting hot. Once it's hot, it's always maybe here for you know, if I'm cooking, or all the way vertical if I'm just heating with it. Right now I'm trying to get this nice and hot, so keep it mostly wide open. And once this gets up to a couple hundred degrees, then I'll switch it to bake, and then it'll start retaining more of the heat. Starting these stoves, I had this wide open. Once it got really roaring, I put it halfway. That's still very generous. I've got this shut, so I've got all the air going into the stove is going through the ash box directly up through the wood, through the fire. It's sort of like when you build a campfire on a grate versus flat on the ground, how much hotter the fire on a grate will burn. And that's because you can get that under air, underneath it. And when these fires are going this hot, even with this wood being a little wet, it's real easy to just run up. Next thing you know, you've got nothing but coals in there. So all that lichen. That's some interesting wood to be starting a fire with, but here we are. It was free. Once this is going, depending on what you want to do with it, when I'm baking in the oven, set my ash pan inlet air to, whatever I need it to be to keep the fire brisk, but not over the top. And then what I'll do is I'll shut this all the way, pull this to bake, and I'll set that damper to nearly as vertical as I can get it. And what that'll do is that'll hold a lot of your air in the stove for as long as it possibly can. And it'll increase your creosote deposits a little bit, unless you've got really, really well-seasoned wood. But it's, sometimes it's worth it. You get that oven up to temp real quick. And then once you're burning your stove for heat, you can just fire it real hot and you burn a lot of that creosote right back out. And then there's a clean out pan under this panel. You can see it. So once in a blue moon, you check under there with a flashlight. Get a small tool in there and you can clean out all that junk. If you have one of these and it doesn't bake as well as you think it should, it doesn't get as hot as you think it should, guarantee you the side of your oven and all underneath your oven box is just crammed full of junk. Ash, creosote. If you don't run this year round, if you have a summer cabin or something like that, you'll find a lot of time mice love living under the oven boxes in these. I've never really found one of these that sat for a couple years that wasn't full of mice, so that's something to consider. So I pretty much always have this on bake, even when I'm cooking on the stovetop, and that's because pretty much I'm always heating with this simultaneously. In the summertime, though, it's pretty much always on open, and the wood that I'm burning in here to cook in the summer is never really ever any bigger than, say, a paper towel roll or a toilet paper roll. It's never really any bigger than a couple of inches, and that's just because as soon as you're done cooking, you want your coals to get nice and hot, and as soon as you're done cooking, you want to time it so that it burns out. So you'll find sometimes that your stovetop gets too hot. And so what I have found, and I don't know if this is the real way, but what I have found works great is I open this to whatever degree I need to bypass the air going in here. And that basically makes a nice little bit of flow directly over the top of the fire. And it kind of keeps the heat. It sort of insulates this top, it pulls the heat across the stovetop faster, especially if it's on open. So this will usually drop by about 50 degrees straight away if I do that. That and closing this down completely and maybe opening your damper a little bit. That's pretty much one of the only ways that I have found with a stove as gappy as one of these to rapidly cool the top. When you're baking and you want it to be as hot as you can possibly get it, sometimes if your stove has it, you can use this flue box damper. Put that all the way shut. That in conjunction with your top damper really, really, really holds the heat in. But you have to have a very hot fire, preferably mostly coals, very seasoned wood. Any smoke you've got, if you've got it damped down that much, it's going to be not only depositing creosote all over the inside of your stove, but you're running the risk of just having whatever food you're baking in the oven stink like, you know, that wet wood, inefficient burn, fuel-rich kind of burn smell. You know, that dank kind of campfire scent. You don't necessarily want that in a loaf of bread. So if you're cooking in the oven especially, and you're damping it down as far as it goes, make sure your wood is very dry. Best way to go about it is to have a nice thick coal bed a few inches deep, with some very dry wood on top. That way you can get through your whole baking time for most things without having to add more wood, and that'll let you get away with damping the stove down. And you know, these might not be as efficient as airtights, but you can get them. You know, you can practically put the fire out by shutting all of your vents, your inlet air, and damping it down if you've got it, you know, in good condition. And this stove might look pretty beat up, but it's actually, as you probably found, I don't know if I've got the video up yet, but this might go up before that, but I just finished restoring this again. Not restoring it for cosmetics, but restoring it for functionality. So, you know, this is a over 100-year-old stove. At least that's what I'm thinking. They made these up until like I think they made, this is a Glenwood C. Well, it's a Crescent Classic, but it's basically a Glenwood C. It's the same pattern, castings. The parts are all interchangeable. And they made these into the 20s, maybe even the 30s as far as I can tell. Either way, it's been cranking away here in New England, keeping people warm and cooking their food now for multiple generations. And we're really happy with it. This is the 5th or 6th one I've actually ran and used it for cooking. You know, I'm kind of nostalgic about them. So there are better stoves, certainly. You know, I think in another video I'll go over what to look for in these, because if you don't know what you're looking for, it's easy to get in over your head with these. And when they're in bad shape, they are not fun. You know, just like anything. You know, an old car or any old appliance. When they're old, beat up, they're old and beat up. Yeah, now it's really cooking in there. I'm gonna do some basic cooking videos just for fun. Why not? There's nothing out there on these stoves, and I might not be the best candidate for making these videos, but somebody's got to do it, so I'll do it. So in summary, essentially, once you get past the basic starting the fire, which is the same amongst all wood stoves really, you know, start with your small wood, then your larger bits of kindling, and, you know, work your way up from there. And once you get a good fire going, that's when you have to work on your controls. So when you're starting your fire again, you want your ash box wide open. You want your upper inlet closed. You want your oven set to open, so your flue rather set to open. You want to have your camera focus on the oven and stop focusing all over the place. You want to have your flue damper wide open. And of course, you want to have your top damper wide open. Now that's for starting the fire. Now once everything gets hot, it all depends on what you want to do. If you're just getting it fired up for cooking, then you're pretty much going to want to leave it the way you have it set up for starting the fire. And you'll probably adjust your upper damper to control your flame and maybe your ash box, and that'll give you a good quick hot fire, you know, which you can keep adding wood as you need to maintain it. And then when you're done, you just stop, and it should burn itself out fairly quickly. You know, if you're going to be cooking for a longer period of time, then you could set your flue closed so that the oven starts to heat up, and that'll also make your whole entire cooktop hotter, so you can actually cook a wider array of things on a larger cooktop surface. These aren't burners, as you can see. They're just lids. The hottest part of the stove tends to be right where I've got this pan. It basically goes like this, if I remember correctly. That's the hottest. Then it sort of gets cooler, cooler, cooler yet, even cooler, and then this right around here is the coolest part of the stove, not counting, of course, things like the additional shelves, and those are never really all that hot, and that's a good thing. Just like these warming shelves, these never really get too hot. I wouldn't put anything like candle or plastic or what have you. If you're baking, then you're going to want to shut your upper damper more. You're going to want to adjust your lower ash box to get your fire right where you need it so that it's, burning efficiently, not too rich, not too smoky. As we mentioned earlier, you're going to want to have the nice dry wood, the bed of coals, really seasoned firewood, nothing too creosote producing, so that you can then shut your flue damper all the way down. Like so. It's a little dark in here. And that'll help you when you add it to the upper damper. That'll help you to get the fire about as hot as you can in the oven. Now for this specific kind of stove, the Glenwood pattern stoves, you can feed your wood either direct through here, which is pretty much what I do, or you can open this little door. It's a feed door. That's really handy when you're cooking. That's where you can feed those small pieces of wood we were talking about through. That is hot. And on some stoves you can set them up to load through the front. As you can see, I've got a nail here. I had this set up to feed through the front. In the winter when I'm heating with it, I have it set to feed only through the top or the side. This gets way too hot, so I've got like some fire brick in there temporarily. But this could actually be removed. I could theoretically feed in larger pieces, and that's set up for wood. When it's set up for coal, it's a whole different beast. Right here is where you'd usually have your shaker grates, your big handle, and practice makes perfect. There's nothing better than getting a few fires under your belt. You can do dinner. It's delicious. It's some curried chicken. Got some butternut squash it's sliced up, put in there, and broccoli and some peppers and some green beans and pretty much any sort of vegetable, frozen or otherwise, I could find. In the wintertime here, it's slim pickings. So that should probably come off now, but let it reduce a little longer. Maybe I'll even pop that lid over. I usually keep the lid on because I don't want too much spatter. I oil the surface with preferably either walnut or linseed oil, but really, a lot of the oil that this gets is from just over spatter from cooking, especially if you're doing browning any kind of meat, or reducing something without a lid, and these ovens get plenty hot enough to bake in. I've made turkeys in them. I have made plenty of loaves of bread. I've made pastries. Pretty much anything you could. I've not cured. I've seasoned my cast iron frying pans in there. Pretty much anything you'd put in a regular oven, you can do that in one of these. They've got a lot more hot spots than a standard electric oven or even a gas oven, for that matter. Once you get the hang of it, you can actually use that to your advantage. The fire is only separated from the oven by a bit of fire brick, refractory cement, and a thin bit of cast iron. So that wall tends to get exceedingly hot as compared to the rest of the oven surfaces. So you can actually use that to your advantage doing meat. I hope that works out for you. I hope you find this information useful, and hopefully as I get better at making these videos, they become more accessible. Hopefully this can be sort of a resource for this kind of obscure stuff. I mean, I know that this topic isn't obscure in and of itself, but I couldn't find a lot online, like I was saying, about these stoves and a few other subjects I'd like to cover.